corner, but not the total building free falling.
Got that corner that's going to want to topple over, but we didn't see that. We saw it come straight down.
If the buildings had come down by fire, we would have seen a more natural progression of collapse. We may have seen, the buildings actually topple over to one side, certainly not coming down in its own footprint.
And clearly a more asymmetrical pattern should have been present.
I'm Kathy McGrade. I have a bachelor's in metallurgical engineering from New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, which I got in 1979. I then spent the next 30 years with 3 startup companies. The symmetry is the smoking gun. It cannot happen that when you have asymmetric damage, you will get a perfectly symmetrical collapse.
It would not have been a uniform collapse. The building might have partially fallen over, but the building would not have collapsed as it did. This doesn't make any logical sense.
For it to come down straight down upon itself, you would need to basically take out the supports at the center, at the core.
The exterior columns on the outside as well as on the inside, at the bottom would have to be severed almost at the same time.
In my professional opinion, in my experience, for World Trade Center 7 to collapse straight down upon itself, as video indicates, as everything that we've witnessed, the supports at the center essentially all had to be taken out at once.
Well, that's another indicator that this NIST report is very suspect, because I would have expected in a classic implosion, as I've seen numerous times, is the core to fail. My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosives demolition firm in the world. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition. I was licensed while in New York by the New York Fire Department to handle explosives. And I worked on major projects such as Seattle Kingdom, the Three River Stadium, Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and Key Span gas holders in New York. I would expect the center of the building to start moving first, and then as the implosion progresses, then the sides come in, then the rest of the building is involved. What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
And there were so many columns in the building that were not affected by either the fires or the impact damage, and they all came down just at once. So it's a little disheartening, and it's implausible.
When it's all finished, the outside walls from the lower floors are piled one on top of the other right in the middle of the building. Just like a house of cards if it were coming down.
Logic tells you that if you have a single failure at some random point in the building, that the entire building is not going to collapse. The collapse would have been a chaotic, random event. The building would have partially collapsed, possibly, but it didn't. There was a total collapse, and there's very few things that could explain that, none of which are addressed by the NIST report. According to NIST, the failure occurred at column 79 on level 12. This means basically they're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building. That just does not make any sense.
As a structural engineer, I don't believe that the failure of one column would normally bring down an entire building in the way we saw World Trade Center 7 come down, because of redundancy, because of all the other columns in the building that were not affected.
NIST provided computer animations in support of their fire collapse theory. But what do independent engineers say about these animations?
When you observe the footage of how the building failed, and when you look at the animation of the failure, and compare that to what you actually observe in reality, I think they disprove their own theories. It is impossible for it to fail the way they said.
I've seen the animation sequence from the National Institute of Standards and Technology for their model, their mathematical model of the collapse of building number 7. And they have the inside members, the one column gave way, which they claim resulted in the collapse of all the surrounding members, and then this precipitated a global collapse.
The NIST computer model, actually, they had done a bunch of finite element models of the connections, individual connections, so they had connections failing before the members failed. 4-part connections, when 3 of the 4 parts failed, they considered it to be all failed.
The exterior of the NIST World Trade Center 7 computer simulation model, which they put together to try to explain their theory, shows large, very large deformations which are not observed in the video of the actual event. Yet they don't attempt to explain this in the report on why their model doesn't represent or replicate reality. What's actually happening with the NIST computer model, it's behaving like a natural collapse would. It would be deforming the exterior of the building if the whole interior was collapsing prior to the exterior. What we're seeing is what would happen in a natural collapse, and what we see on the real video is not a natural collapse.
So I think that the NIST model is flawed. Of course, they won't release all of their parameters that they use to model the collapse, and that is a primary problem for them.
NIST has also repeatedly refused to release computer input data that was requested through the Freedom of Information Act from them in the past concerning World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7.
What do these professionals conclude about the destruction of World Trade Center Building 7?
There had to be some agent that was destroying the connections in building number 7 at 400 connections per second, and the only thing that I can see that would be capable of doing this would be explosive devices at the connections. And this is why I think that there has to be a new investigation to find out the real physical causes for all these members to act in an atypical fashion.
And I certainly believe that it had to have been controlled demolition, controlled charges, explosives, something of that type, because it was a sudden failure.
Controlled demolition. There's no way that fire did what they said it did to that building. Impossible. Couldn't happen. It just did not make sense that a building that had a few minor fires in it could possibly succumb the way it did. If there was damage, it would have been minor. There might have been some deflection of a beam or two here or there, but not a total and unequivocal complete collapse. It just doesn't ring true.
A few fires in that building, and I mean, they weren't even raging. And how could that cause a building to collapse as if it were imploded? Couldn't happen.
To me, it was obvious that there was some controlled demolition and some explosions involved.
When I saw Building 7 fall, it to me appeared to be controlled demolition because it fell in free fall manner into itself. It is my opinion, as a former 12 Bravo combat engineer, well trained in the use of explosives, that this building, all 3 buildings, were brought down as a result of controlled demolitions.
This is the original site of the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Construction is now underway where dramatic new facilities are being erected. Just 10 years ago, the planes hit the towers, cutting through some exterior and interior supporting structural steel columns. The fuel from the planes ignited office fires across several floors. According to the official reports, the structural steel frame was weakened and failed, causing a total progressive collapse of each tower. Does the official explanation make sense? Was there a comprehensive investigation that examined all of the evidence? Let's look at the details.
These buildings were designed to take multiple impacts from airliners.
I walked into the office and the first words that I heard was, "A plane's just run into the World Trade Center." And my initial thought was, well, that's okay. It's built to withstand a 707.
He stated that the fuel would be dumped into the building, but the building would still be there. although most of the fuel blew out the opposite side of the building.
These buildings are built to handle several times the load above them. Those perimeter columns could handle 5 times the load above them, and the core columns could handle 3 times the load above them.
The majority of the jet fuel was burnt up instantly in the big fireball, and it was gone. The fires that were left were office furnishings and carpet and things like that. A lot of things in these kind of buildings have to be fire resistant by nature. It's required by code. So there really isn't a whole lot of fuel in there to begin with.
The media portrayed these fires as being extremely hot, but the fires were not that hot in World Trade Center 1 and 2. If you look at the NIST zone data, you could see this. And to use our own powers of observation, you could tell by seeing these fires and seeing black smoke come out the windows. That means that the fires were oxygen starved, and it was incomplete combustion, and so it was a low temperature fire.
I am Robert Podolsky. I have a master's degree in theoretical physics from Xavier University in Cincinnati. I worked for 10 years as a professional physicist, engineer, systems analyst for government and for industry, companies like Avco, GE, Bendix, and also Air Force Avionics Lab and the Coast Guard Electronics Division. I looked up in a manual the burning temperature of jet fuel and found that under the conditions that existed at the World Trade Center on 9/11, that jet fuel had to have been burning at about 750 degrees Fahrenheit. I also noticed that the official explanation of what happened there was that the heat from the fire supposedly softened the steel and thereby brought the buildings down. If you have a flame at 750 degrees, you can hold that flame under a steel beam forever, and you'll never reach a high enough temperature to bend steel, let alone melt it. So immediately I knew at that point that the official explanation was dead wrong. There was no way those flames could have possibly brought about the collapse of the building.
It did not seem possible that these towers that were designed to withstand the impact of a 707 could possibly collapse in such a short order of time from the time that they were hit. There's no way. The building was designed to take the impact of one, if not more, multiple airplanes. They were designed to withstand hurricane force winds of up to 140 miles an hour.
My first reaction was, that looks like controlled demolitions. However, I believed the official story because it was played to me over and over again. I heard repeated experts telling me that this was terrorists that did this and that it was planes that brought those buildings down. So I accepted the official story.
The NIST testing of the Twin Tower floor assemblies done at Underwriters Laboratories. This was done per ASTM E119 in a 2-hour, 2,000-degree fire test. During the test, the main trusses sagged approximately 4 inches after 60 minutes and 6 inches after 100 minutes. Yet NIST had the main trusses sagging well over 40 inches in their models.
Rather than a slow groaning collapse that we might anticipate, the Twin Towers show in the videos a very rapid, sudden onset of destruction. What does this imply?
I'm Frank Cullinan, a practicing civil engineer in the state of California. I have a Bachelor of Science from Chico State, which I received in 1988. I've been a licensed civil engineer since 1993. I specialize in bridge construction, retaining wall construction, small building construction, bridge